Grab a seat, feeling great. Is this making sense so far? Yes or no? And is it fairly common sense? Yes or no? Yes. Does anyone have any questions at this point in time? Okay. I'll take a couple of questions, but some of the questions might be related to things we're going to cover in a moment, but I'll take a couple and see if I'll go up here. We'll just get a microphone, and that way, just this event's also being filmed, so for the, can we also welcome the people that will be sitting at home watching this in the future? Give them a welcome. That way we also need to always have a microphone when you ask a question. That way the people at home can hear the question. Otherwise they'll be going, can't hear that goddamn question. Hi, Ruben.
Why did Phoenix drop so much?
A good question. So what happened? Well, let's talk about the credit when I go into the credit crisis and explain that sort of thing. Yeah. But the three cities that obviously why it dropped so much in a nutshell is those Phoenix, Las Vegas, Florida were the three cities that grew the most. As far as in prices, the prices were getting most overvalued. So they had the furthest to fall. Okay, that's part of the reason. So, any other questions? Yeah, over here, far away.
What are the pros and cons of the Section 8 low-income housing?
Okay, Section 8, we might talk about that later in the event, a little bit more too detailed at this point in time. But Section 8, those aren't familiar with it, is government guaranteed rentals in properties. So you can get Section 8 properties where you have government guaranteed rentals. So it just means in those type of properties, you have a more secure tenant. Okay, making sense. So let's get back to as far as we started talking about what caused the credit crisis and how this all come about so we can understand the fundamentals, what caused this, and that will give us an insight into what's likely to happen into the future. Okay, so as I talked about, the Bill Clinton administration passed through that law that was pushed to be passed through to enable underprivileged people to be able to get finance for homes. Also then to stimulate the economy, the housing boom was allowed to, was almost encouraged. So the lenders were allowing and people that couldn't really afford to borrow for property to borrow. And just like we used the example in Australia and New Zealand, what would happen is prices in the big short term would go up rapidly. And I shared how my friend, he'd bought 1,000 properties in the 90s. And 5 or 6 years ago, we were talking with a group of people, many Americans that had been basically living off their line of credit and paper wealth, the money on paper, the prices just kept going higher, so they thought they could just keep doing this. And so many people quit their jobs to move in and become property developers or property investors. And that was another trend. As I was saying, when taxi drivers are doing it, everyone's doing it, there's a bubble occurring. Okay, so it wasn't like it couldn't be seen. It's that people didn't realize a property bubble and a potential bust in the US housing market would cause a credit crisis that affected the whole world. No one could, at that point, very few people are putting that link together. Okay. Also, people were naive to go, well, US housing has always grown, it will grow forever. Therefore, they didn't believe it was a bubble. So that was the other thing that people were missing. Now, what also started to happen, why banks were more relaxed and lending more and more people was all because what they were doing is they would dissect the risk. So they might lend the money to someone and they didn't particularly care so much whether those loan applicants could actually afford to repay the repayments, because what they were doing was making a lot of money, especially Lehman Brothers, most of the big banks, is they would sell, jot this word down, they would sell mortgage-backed securities. They would package up these mortgages into funds, and then they would flog them to investors around the world, make massive amount of profit on doing this. And because they were, quote, mortgage-backed securities, as an investor, you go, oh, they're backed by mortgages of the US real estate market, they must be secure and they must be safe. They sounded like safe investors. So a lot of overseas investors were sold on these funds and they bought them. So what would happen is the Lehman Brothers in particular, because remember Lehman Brothers went broke. When Lehman Brothers went broke, that was the whole financial system was a matter of days. People don't realize how close the US and effectively the world's financial system come to complete collapse. It was within 1 or 2 days of complete financial meltdown, which would have changed the planet, the world completely. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, that's when complete anarchy started. That's where they had to step in and do any measure to stop the system collapsing completely. Okay, that's how close it come. Now, Lehman Brothers is one of many banks. Before Lehman Brothers went under, remember Bear Stearns was about to go under. I think it was bought for $2 a share or something. And at that time, what the Federal Reserve was doing in America, they were basically, what is a bank called Watchover, is that the correct pronunciation? The directors of that bank were basically said, we were not even given the option. The Federal Reserve come in and said, we don't care, you're being bought out by a bigger bank, boom, gone. Just took the bank over. You know, that's what the Federal Reserve was doing at that point. And they basically, and even if you speak to Wells Fargo, I was speaking to the team yesterday in Wells Fargo, it's one of the better banks in America. The Federal Reserve made, even the banks that didn't need government money, they made them take it. So Wells Fargo was one of the banks that were forced to take the government handout money. And they're like, we don't need it. We're a safe bank. We're fine. They had to take it anyhow. So all this was going on, and a lot of this, you don't realize how many smaller banks in America went broke. Even the bigger banks like Citibank was like almost about to go under. So the pressure on all these banks. Why? Because they had so many toxic mortgages. Toxic being mortgages that were not worth anything because you've loaned out money to someone that in many cases didn't have a job. Okay? Some of them say no income, no job, no idea, and they're loaning the money. Okay, even the homeless people, so they had no ability to pay back the loan. Also, a lot of the loans were done on honeymoon rates, so they were very low rates to start with, like incredibly low, and then in a couple of years they reset to the proper rate. So all it was doing is it disguised the problem in the short term, but when those rates were reset, then people just couldn't afford them. Also, the loans were secured by inflated property prices. So security really wasn't that strong anymore because a property that you today might pick up for 60, 70,000 was selling for 150, 200, in some cases 250,000. So the security really was, a lot of it was paper security. So what would happen is the banks wouldn't care so much because they would take these mortgages, write the mortgages as quick as they could. So there was a mortgage boom. Anyone in the finance broking industry during these times before the credit crisis was making an absolute killing. Okay, absolute killing because they're just writing loans, making all this commission because they'll prove anyone. Imagine being a mortgage broker when you can basically get a homeless person a loan. It's just sign here and they've collected another paycheck, another commission. So all this mortgage fraud was going on as well. It was out of control. Now in Australia, we're fortunate we have a much more stricter banking system. But remember before the credit crisis, was it easy to get a loan in Australia, yes or no? In New Zealand, we've been saying it was much easier. So they've tightened it up a lot since then, but it wasn't as easy in America. It was anyone could basically get it, okay? So it was out of control. Now the banks didn't care so much because what they would do is they would issue all these loans, then they would put it into a fund and they dissect it up and sell it, okay? And often the mortgages were owned by multiple banks at the one time, so they'll divide like insurance, just divide them all up, and they were sold. So they only had to carry them on the books briefly, and they're sold. So they didn't care at the end result. They weren't even looking at it because they were making money that way. Lehman Brothers was making so much money out of this. What they would do is they went and bought a lot of the big mortgage companies that were writing all these loans. So they'd go and buy these companies to write more loans, and they'd say, well, okay, we're going to buy $10 billion worth of mortgages this month, because they wrap them up into mortgage-backed securities funds and sell to international investors at a significant profit. So that $10 billion they then offload around the world to investors and make billions to the bottom line. That is fine, wherever there's liquidity in the system and there's enough overseas investors happy to buy these mortgages. What eventually happened is overseas investors started to get a little bit nervous and concerned about the property bubble in the US, and they stopped wanting to buy these mortgage-backed securities. So let's say Lehman Brothers has gone out and bought another $10 billion worth of loans. Okay, it's had its own loan companies, it's bought property companies out there selling these loans, and they go then to flip it and basically put in a security fund and then sell it, but then there's no longer any buyers. The problem is they've just bought, say, $10 billion as an example of mortgages, and they got no one to pass it to. And like the whole market's dried up, liquidity's dried up. Now they're screwed because they've got all these mortgages that are toxic, that are not worth the paper they're written on, and they're going to go into default. So much so that it sent the Lehman Brothers, one of the oldest banks, under. Does that make sense? And that was happening with other banks on a large scale, and that was the major cause of the credit crash. Okay, and it all started. Now, how it infected and spread around the world is that so many international investors had bought these mortgage-backed securities, now worth nothing. So it had spread the U.S. problem around the world. And it created such mass uncertainty if these major US banks could be going broke or making record losses and some going under, that then it has a catapulting effect. For instance, Lehman Brothers borrows a lot of its money off other banks as well. They all loan money to each other. Other banks knew that they had all these toxic mortgages, what they would do is say they would demand bigger deposits on the loans they've made to them. And now obviously that puts Lehman Brothers under even more cash flow pressure because they've got to put more cash to, otherwise the loans will be pulled. And eventually other banks, like Goldman Sachs, etc., well, they also have a vested interest. If they pull the loans back, they can send Lehman Brothers under. So they pull the loans back. And Lehman Brothers goes to the Federal Reserve for a bailout, and obviously they don't like each other. Some of the people in there don't get along. So they say, we're not going to bail you out. They let it go under, which is a very risky move, okay, where they save some of the other banks. Long story short, we know what happened. Lehman Brothers went under and the credit crisis really imploded and the whole financial system was almost within 2 days of complete collapse. That's what happened. Okay? So it all started from loaning people that no idea, no job, no income on property that was highly inflated that pushed the property prices up. Who's following what I'm saying here now? So that's how we got ourselves into a situation where what has started to happen is now you imagine there's all these people that have taken out loans that aren't making their repayments. So banks have to start foreclosing on the loans because they don't want to have all these default loans on their books because that affects their ability, their capital equity reserve ratio to loan out more money. Okay, they have to call in these loans or they want to try and do something with them. Banks don't particularly want to own real estate. They're not in the real estate business. You want to say, well, why doesn't a bank just keep the property long term and just hold real estate? Well, they make so much more money from mortgages than they do from real estate. Does that make sense? They don't want to be a real estate holder. They need their money liquid so they can loan out more money at 18 times or 20 times their capital reserves, 32 times, depending on the bank, and they can make, like, that's how they make their money. Okay, they don't want it locked up in a piece of real estate. They might be growing even 5 or 10% a year, when they can make hundreds and hundreds % on the mortgages. So they're not interested, they just got to get rid of it. Now, a lot of them had to end up owning a lot of houses they didn't want to own because there was no buyers. But you start to see what happened to property prices is the boom, the lending stops, because no one's lending, so instead of the boom continuing, the price might be of a property $300,000 at the peak, okay? But it's inflated so high from maybe, say, its real value might have been $200,000 as an example, but as there's no more lending, so people can't buy more property, so the stampede for property is stopping, and now you've got the opposite effect, is people are defaulting on their loans, so forced sales. So just like in Australia, if all these extra properties, people went in the property market, property prices go up, all of a sudden banks stop lending, the rush stops. But worse, those who did take all the loans can't afford them, they have to start fire selling the properties. So the prices just come down at a rapid rate. So that's what started to happen. So prices fell all the way down. So in some cases, below $100,000. So who's following what I'm saying there? Pretty much that's in a nutshell. So here we are in, say, Phoenix, 2011. Okay, the credit crisis was when? 2008. So what we have is properties that have dropped in value are massively. So now here's some of the things that you'll have, because in anything that you do in life, whether you invest in the stock market, whether you set up an internet business, whether you change careers or whatever career you go into, whether you buy real estate or whether you buy real estate in Australia or whether you buy real estate in the US or whatever you do, is there going to be people out there that are naysayers or negative about anything you do? Yes or no? Who has a few of those people? be careful you don't get ripped off, etc. Okay, or that doesn't work, or this, it doesn't matter what you do, there's always going to be that. And anything that you do, there'll always be different opinions about what's good, what's not. As an investor, that stops so many people being investors. You've got to be able to develop that ability to go, you know what, I might observe what other people say, but I'm going to do my own understanding and awareness and education and just try and stick with the facts. Because what's the opinion really worth? It's not worth that. Everyone has an opinion. So you want to try and stick to the fundamentals and make your own decisions. Because so few people in a society have that ability to make a decision, be comfortable with it, accept the risk and the reward, and be accountable and responsible, that's why few people become successful investors. Because they're ruled by the committee called what? Jot this down. They. They're ruled by the committee called they. What that is what they would say, what they said. They won't do anything unless they go and check with all their friends, all their family, and say, do you think this is a good idea? And unless they get 100 of their family and friends to go, yep, unanimously say that's a great idea, they won't make a decision. Now, the chances of getting all your family and all your friends and all your acquaintances to agree on anything is very low. Is that true? Yes. And if they all thought it was a good idea, we would have a property bubble. Make sense? It's like when the taxi driver thinks it's a good idea, be worried. So we've got to understand in society, there's always the minority that will do better, okay? If we can be, what's I guess the word contrarian, go against the masses or do things differently or be able to stand and be firm about something we're going to do, even when a lot of other people might be negative or just don't understand. Does that make sense? There'll always be that opportunity. And which is good. When I started teaching people many years ago, I used to get so annoyed and people were so negative about things and be like, well, actually, the reason, because people are so negative about most things gives us the opportunity to do well. Does that make sense? If people were all positive about everything, then the opportunity wouldn't be there. So we need to be grateful. Jot this down. Be grateful for negative people. They make you money. Do you understand that? Let people be what they want to be, okay? If you want to change and help other people, just be the example. Does that make sense? The smart ones will go, what do you want to? Because people's fear of loss will change to fear of missing out. Does that make sense? The fear of, because you understand psychology, those who've done the 4-day or as a gift, who has done a 4-day? Okay. Quite a few of you. What I will do is make sure, as a gift to each and every one of you to continue your education, I'll make sure that you get a ticket to a 4-day event in Australia or New Zealand. Who would like to be able to do that sometime? Okay, we hold them each capital city pretty much, and also we'll be in Queenstown in July as well for Kiwis. So you're welcome to come there because they will teach you a lot more about psychology. But for those who have been through that process, when I talk about people will do more to avoid pain than they will to gain pleasure. So what you got to understand that when it comes to investing, the fear of loss is a major pain. So people will do more to avoid losing than they will to move towards the pleasure of profiting or winning. Make sense? So even though in Australia or New Zealand we live in very rich countries, most people are not rich. One of the reasons is because people will limit themselves, their ability, they will not follow through because of the fear of loss. That pain is so great, they want to do anything to avoid losing. Even though there might be $1 million sitting over here that's available, you just have to take action and go for it, be diligent and follow through, and there's $1 million. And everyone goes, I want $1 million. True, people want $1 million, but also that's pleasure. They also over here have the pain, but to get that $1 million, I might have to could potentially lose something. And let's say the upside was $1 million and the downside was 100,000. Okay, now us in this room, who would be willing to risk 100,000 for $1 million? Okay, because we can see the reward. There's risk to everything. Some people say, Jamie, I would do anything if you can. You guarantee me there's no risk? Okay, it's not life, is it? Okay, we know there's a risk to everything. Actually, life is so risky. There's not a single person in this room here today that will get out of life alive. That's how risky it is. Make sense? So there's a risk to everything. We just got to be comfortable with the risk. But how do we be comfortable? Say, here's the reward. Here's the risk. Weigh it up and go, is the reward worth the risk? It depends how much they are, and that's how we make a decision. A lot of people go, I just want to avoid risk completely. Well, trying to avoid risk completely can cause a lot more risk. We want to minimize and be intelligent, but we don't want to avoid because what the opportunity cost, if there's $1 million on the table and we're going to have to risk 100,000 as an example to get that million, we can weigh up and go, okay, I'm willing to take that risk. Or we get even more educated, more sophisticated and go, how do I minimize that 100,000 so I can potentially only lose, say, 10,000 as an example. That's how a sophisticated investor would do. And my upside instead of $1 million is 10 million. Okay, that's like a Richard Branson or Donald Trump or Jamie Packer, a higher level. That's what they're doing. How they even boost the returns even higher by minimizing the risk. Okay, so that's just being extra educated. But we would be, let's say, we're still 100 grand for $1 million. We'd take the risk. But a lot of other people in society, majority of them, the pain of losing, say, that amount of money, they will avoid that more so than the pleasure of winning. And as a result of that, they will procrastinate, hesitate, doubt themselves, not follow through, make elaborate excuses, all justifications. Oh, it's probably a scam anyhow. Oh, it sounds too good to be true. Probably doesn't work. Oh, it's all right for other people. Do you know what I'm saying? It's this whole, because most people aren't going to go and be completely honest and go, no, it's because I'm a scared, gutless person and I'm not willing to face my fears and make a calculated decision. Are most people going to say that, yes or no? No, they're not going to say that, okay? Or if you speak to experts that don't actually really know what's going on, are they going to go, well, I'm an expert, I should know everything. Actually, I know nothing about this topic, therefore, don't pay me any money. Is a local accountant in Australia, if he doesn't know anything about the U.S. property market, is he going to usually admit it? Or if it's share renting, whatever it is. Generally, there's justifications for what they don't know. So if you understand that, you just say, okay, to figure things out, you really just got to become comfortable with knowing the fundamentals, comfortable with making a decision, and just do your own thing. And not worry what other people say, do, or think. Otherwise, you're controlled by the committee called they. Okay. Now, some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've been used to making decisions. You're already proactive investors, and as a result of that, you've been successful. True? Because you just do what you want to do anyhow. Okay. But you've got to be aware of that because there's always the fear and the doubt that we all face. Or then we make a decision and follow through, and then it's like other people, because they have fear and doubt, they induce you into a state of fear and doubt. It's like, oh, have I done the right thing? Or maybe it won't work out. And this fear and this energy actually decreases our chance of success. Okay? So the key is, what we just got to do is live above the line. So draw this line. Okay? We want to live above the line. So below the line is this. People that do what? Blame. If something doesn't work out, they will blame others. Okay? They've made their own decision on many things and it hasn't worked out, and they will blame other people for it. Yet who made the decision? Okay? A lot of people make decisions by default. Why they want to rely on other people and make decisions for them? Because subconscious is like, well, shit, if it doesn't work, they've made the decision for me, so I'll blame them. It's like a lazy way to escape responsibility. We just got to make a decision, accept the risk and reward, and say, this is what I'm prepared to do. If it doesn't work out the way I want it to, well, I can adjust my strategy. Actually, I can preempt and prepare in advance of what can go wrong. True? And be smart about that and know what our repercussions are up front. That's all we can do. They also will make excuses, as we talked about, of why they can't do it or why it won't work or why it's not a good idea. Happens all the time. True? And the other thing is they'll be in denial. They'll be in denial. An example of that is they will be in denial about, they'll say, well, money's not really important anyhow. I'm not really into money. I'm not materialistic. And they'll be in denial. The reality is that, well, as I say to people like that, if you're not really into money, here's what I recommend to do. Go down to the local shopping centre, supermarket, load up your trolley full of groceries, push it up to the checkout operator and go, you know what? I'm not really into money. I'm not materialistic. Actually, money's not that important. And continue to push the trolley outside the door. You may not be into money, but guess what? The rest of the world is. So jot this down. Money is what? Money is everything. No. Money is what? It's important. Now, am I suggesting it's the most important thing on the planet? No, but it's pretty much up there with oxygen. Does that make sense? So, of course, if we have a truly congruent, valued life, I think time with family, friends, your health, doing a career because you love it, okay, doing something that makes a difference, all those things should be more valuable than money. But the reality is, in a capitalistic, materialistic society, unless we master money, money will jump to the top priority all the time. How many people work too much and sacrifice time with family or friends? How many, happens to be honest, how many people affect their health from the pursuit of money, from stress, etc.? Okay? How many people do a career, sometimes it's not their dream career, but they need the money. So in society, unless we master money, those things dictate and have it. So an example of denial is the average person is like, yeah, I'm not into money. They're in denial of the importance of money. Yeah, money's not really important, yet they spend nearly every waking hour thinking about it and most of their life working for the pursuit of money, all along going, it's not really important. That is incongruency, it's denial. Making sense? So we have to be, I know I'm speaking to the converter here, you understand this, but it's important. Is it true? We just have to accept, just like you say, well, you don't have to put the effort in to buy US property, but you are because you go, well, here's a game plan that I have, this is what I want to achieve, and here's an opportunity, and that can help me get from A to B faster, and I'm going to explore that if that's a possibility for me. Making sense? So then we do our common sense. But then even then we want to say, how do we minimize our risk? So just on finishing this, above the line is being what? Starts with R. Responsible for the decisions that we make. Okay? Another word I guess you can use for that is accountability. To be successful. It's like for the difference from a child to an adult. An adult is meant to be responsible. Is that true? An adult is meant to be accountable for their own actions. Knowing that, it was interesting, I've watched that movie on the plane over 127 hours. Who's seen that movie? I was almost fainting at one part of it, but sometimes don't you wish you got a sharp knife around? But see, when he was delirious, he was having those thoughts. When those who haven't seen 127 Hours, it's a true life story of Aaron Ralston, where he was trapped in a canyon in America. He was hiking by himself, and a boulder rolled onto his arm, and he's in a canyon in the middle of nowhere. No one's going to find him. No one knows he's there, and he can't move. His arm's trapped, no matter what he tries. And he's trapped there for 127 hours. And his only way of survival in the end is to cut his arm off. And all he has left is a little pokey knife that he's been chipping away at the boulder. So it's now so blunt, it won't physically cut. So he's faced with the choice of effectively stabbing his arm and trying to do everything because he has no choice. He's going to die. He's out of water. No one's going to find him. So you're faced with cut your own arm off or die. So when you talk about pain and pleasure, well, if the pain of dying is strong enough, it's pleasurable to cut your own arm off. Does that make sense? That's how he had to reframe himself. Okay. Now, so that part of the movie is a little bit hard to watch, but it's actually a true story. We're actually looking at getting Aaron to come out to Australia and speak. We're doing an event with Richard Branson. Got Richard Branson coming out in October. That hasn't been released to the public yet, but in Melbourne actually for a 2-day event. So we're looking at some other speakers. We're trying to get Tim Ferriss as well, who's read the 4-Hour Work Week, people like that. But Aaron's story is amazing. So the point of that story, how does that relate to US property? Absolutely nothing, but there was a point to the story. The point to the story was this: accountable and responsible. When he was delirious, he was going through these whole thoughts, is that, his whole life has been leading him to this boulder. Because in his life, he'd been arrogant, ungrateful, took things for granted, took his family for granted, didn't even get back to his mum when she rang sometimes. He was irresponsible. He'd go hiking. He was ego-driven that he wouldn't even tell his friends. Like all he'd told is just one friend where he went. After a few days, they'd come looking for him. He would have been able to survive without having to cut his arm off. So the idea was that, he had to accept complete responsibility and accountability for the situation he was in because it was his own fault. It was the way he'd behaved that got himself into this situation. It was like his whole life was leading to that boulder that was stuck there and he's going to die. Unless he transformed and changed immediately. Accepted that it was his fault and he had to do something about it, as difficult as those circumstances were, and he had to make a choice. Now, that's a pretty difficult choice, But in the end, what choice did he have? To die? Well, that's the only choice he had. But the lesson, certainly a big lesson for him, that if he hadn't have been so irresponsible and had taken more account responsibility for his life, he could have avoided that situation quite easily. Who's following what I'm saying here? So it was really a transforming time in his life, actually. So his life, out of that tragic thing, has become much better. Okay? Better because he really was getting the lesson. When you're stuck there for 5 days, you've got a little bit of time to ponder about how you ended up here and what maybe would change in your life if you got a second chance. Okay. Who hasn't seen the movie that would maybe consider seeing it now? It's, yeah. So accountable and responsible. Here's what I want you to do. Turn to the person next to you and just teach them what you've learned so far. Remember, all we're going to do is sticking to fundamentals, understanding we have to be contrarian sometimes. Warren Buffett is a great contrarian investor, and Warren Buffett is he's invested a lot and continue to invest a lot in the U.S. property market as well. I mean, he's someone that who would value Warren Buffett's judgment on investing. We teach his principles in the home study and those that come to a 4-day as far as the stock market, but he's a contrarian investor, meaning he'll often go against what other people are doing. And he's put a lot of money in because he believes long-term it will recover. So we'll talk a little bit about that after lunch, and also a little bit more about, what are the risks, what's likely to happen in the future. That's just really an opinion, but we're going to look at the fundamentals. And then I'm going to share with you my viewpoint personally, why, how I minimize my risk and where I'm thinking at it. So we set ourselves up for the most likely chance of success. There is no guarantees. We don't know. There's no crystal ball. Warren Buffett, no one has a crystal ball that says this is what's definitely going to happen to the US property market in the future. But I'm going to share with you so we can preempt and be prepared. It doesn't matter what happens, how we set ourselves up to maximize our potential profit from that. But also look at what's the worst case scenario and be comfortable with that. Because if you're comfortable with that, then you don't want to get in a situation where you invest, and it's like people invest in the stock market for the first time, they're like, I hope the share price goes up, and they're praying to God, I hope the share price goes up, and someone else in the world is praying to God, the share price goes down. And what's God meant to do about it, okay? It's not God's job to have you a successful investor. You've been given God-given talents, does that make sense? The ability to think, the ability to co-create, the ability to make decisions, the ability to take action. God's done his job. Okay? Or she's done her job, whatever you... The rest is for you to do your job. Is that fair enough? Okay? And that's be able to preempt, make a decision, be accountable and responsible, okay, for what can go wrong, but just understand that. And we're going to say, well, we know up front, how do we prepare for that? And of course, we're going to share the most obvious mistakes and how we solve a lot of that automatically, okay? And just being intelligent and strategic about what we're going to do. Okay, so what we're going to do is, do we have any questions? Anyone have any questions on what we've covered so far? Or probably do, but you want to go for lunch, is that true? So what we're going to do, we're going to have a lunch break now. I'm going to come back in, I'll cover a little bit more, and then we're going to introduce you to a finance speaker. Then you're going to be learning from Mr. Warren Black, talking about the tax, how that works with Australia and the US. We also, for those from New Zealand, we obviously in your manual there, you'd already have a tax report for Australians investing in the US. We have some additional literature for those from New Zealand, so we haven't forgotten you, okay? And then there's a New Zealand accountant that we work with. You can speak to them, not here, but when you go back, if you want additional advice about your New Zealand side of things. But as far as the US side of things, you're going to learn from here as well. And then after that, we have a US attorney coming to speak with you as well. And because I'm here this week, you will be pleased to know not only will you get to sleep in more of a morning time, okay, the days will actually go less than what they've done sometimes in the past. Why? Because I don't want you overwhelmed with too much information. I just want the important stuff. And also, you're here for a week. I want you to get a chance to enjoy the resort, to get some sunshine, some fresh air, and you enjoy your experience here as well. Make sense? Okay, so we have a better work-life balance, okay, which is what I'm very big on, okay, how to achieve as much as possible in the least time as possible and the least effort as possible, okay, just by being intelligent about what we do. Okay, very good. So lunch is out where you had breakfast, I imagine, out the same place, so they're pretty much ready for you. I'm being told you'll be back here in 60 minutes, 2:05, Phoenix time, that is, okay? So have a good lunch break. We'll see you back in an hour. Enjoy it.